2 days ago, our good friends at My Arcade, the design geniuses behind things like the Tetris Slurpee Cup, released an interesting trailer on their YouTube letting us know that a new handheld was coming. Well, when you do these mysterious trailers, you invite speculation. In fact, I'm going to take you up on your offer and speculate on the new GameStation Go. Atari is at it again, partnering with My Arcade to create something called the GameStation Go, which is going to be shown off in greater detail at this year's CES coming up in just a few days. Now, this isn't the first time that we've seen this device. A year ago, at the 2024 CES, I guess you could say an earlier version of a prototype of this exact same system was shown off by My Arcade and Atari, and there wasn't really a lot of fanfare behind this. I don't think a lot of tongues were wagging at the trailer and the introduction, and it just sort of went silent. They all ghosted us. I think most of us assumed that it just wasn't going to come to light, but now here we are a couple days ago, a new trailer, a new version of this device appears in the trailer, and the promise that we're going to get more information in the coming days ahead. So I am going to take it upon myself to speculate about what the heck is going on with this thing. Who is it for? Is it going to be any fun? What do we have here? According to the information that was released in last year's CES, I think the interesting things to note here are that this device apparently will have a 7-inch screen. It will have a little tiny miniature version of a trackball on the lower left of this device, and a little knob that is supposed to function as a paddle controller, also on the left side. And then really interestingly, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a moment, what appears to be a 12-digit keypad, perhaps the functional equivalent of the Atari 2600 keyboard controller, perhaps the functional equivalent of the ill-fated and not beloved Atari 5200 controller. Maybe you could use that to represent the Intellivision controller. But again, we'll get into that in just a second. It's an interesting conversation. A cross pad in the absence of an old school joystick, if you will, 4 buttons. So everything you'd need, presumably, to have the types of controls to somewhat mirror the experience you had back in the day. There's surprisingly an HDMI out port on this thing, or at least that's what's being presented in the new video. And interestingly, an SD card slot. One can only imagine what one is going to be able to do with that. And of course, that breaks down to what they intend for you to do and what people will likely do in terms of jailbreaking this thing and hacking it and putting all sorts of other interesting items on the device. But again, let's start with what we know. Now, again, assuming that the basic information from last year's info dump will carry over more or less to this year, the other interesting data point is the price. It was announced that you can expect to pay $150 for this handheld device. I'm going to assume that that's probably going to carry through, that they haven't made some significant breakthrough in manufacturing and cost and anything like that. So I think it's probably a good bet we're going to be asked to pay $150 for this thing as well when it eventually comes out this year, assuming it does. So then the question becomes, okay, who is this for? The games that I'm going to assume you're going to be able to play with it fall into the library of IP that Atari holds: Atari 2600 games, Atari 5200 games, maybe Atari 7800 games, and then, of course, you get into the Intellivision issue. Back in May of this past year, Atari acquired the rights to the Intellivision games. And this is interesting because we have yet, as far as I'm aware, seen Atari really make an effort to monetize the Intellivision games themselves. I'm not talking about like selling t-shirts or, things like that. I'm thinking actually here is a device that you can play Intellivision games with. So if there is something to the reemergence of the GameStation Go as far as playing Intellivision games, that is intriguing to me. However, my level of intrigue is tempered with the overriding question. There's a reason that Intellivision never really got the same kind of cult following or fan base that Atari got, that even ColecoVision got. The games just lacked a certain je ne sais quoi. I just don't think that there's ever really been, over the years and decades, a real fan base for the Intellivision stuff. So I'm wondering if you could really make a strong business case for trying to sell a handheld, which, among other things, plays Intellivision. I've been hunting video games for decades, and I can tell you that I've always seen in an environment, whether it's an estate sale or yard sale or, a swap meet where there's video games and somebody came through and bought up everything, they typically leave behind a few things: sports games, shovelware, Xbox 360, Wii stuff, and anything to do with Intellivision. You can usually tell when a video game person got wiped out when there's just stacks of boxes of Intellivision games. It just doesn't have that collector desirability. Again, I know there's a small, dedicated group of Intellivision fans. I'm not disrespecting you. I'm just saying I don't think your numbers are legion to the point where someone's going to make money selling hardware so that you can decide, you're at the grocery store, my God, I need a round of Armor Attack right freaking now. Talking about I'm not seeing the use case, let's talk a little bit more about this keyboard controller. Now, remember, the design and the first prototype came out a half year before Atari bought Intellivision. I kind of doubt that the intent to play Intellivision games was part of that design and that keyboard, layout on the right side of the device. Even if it was, and even if they've decided to implement Intellivision games in the last 6 months, there's a big problem I see here. Going back to those who know and love the Intellivision and played it, remember that those controllers typically needed plastic overlays over the 12 digits so that you would know what each digit corresponded to in a game function. Like, for example, space games on the Intellivision, the overlay was needed so that you'd know what button did thrust or accelerate or hyperspace or go back to port, so on and so forth. And in the absence of having those overlays, you would have to memorize what each number did. And in the course of playing this game, that gets very frustrating. It doesn't make for a good experience. Looking at the prototype that we see in the video, the most recent one, I don't see how there's any place or way to put a plastic overlay, either the original Intellivision ones or if they remade them. I don't see how they would connect or, slide into that. So I have a feeling that's not going to be a part of it. And if they are going to implement Intellivision games, it's going to really detract from the game playing experience because you're holding up this thing and you've got to, you're playing the game and then you've got to figure out with one hand, which button was it again for thrust? That was 7. And by the time you do it, you've been blown up by aliens. I just have a hard time believing you're going to have a fun, functional Intellivision experience with this if that was a consideration here. Perhaps it was an afterthought and we're going to do it because we can, but the experience is going to be subpar. Now, if you go down that road and you eliminate Intellivision games as the likely reason for that design choice, you're really left with two things here. They were doing it so they could provide the experience for Atari 2600 games with the keyboard controllers or the Star Raiders controller or the Kids controller. They're all the same thing internally. Or perhaps Atari 5200 games. All right. So working our way backward, I'm struggling, to think that it's basically to help you play Atari 5200 games because those games as well also largely required plastic overlays to know what button did what. So without those, again, you're going to have a very clunky experience trying to, finagle what's going on. Of course, those who are lovers of the Atari 5200 are no strangers to dealing with clunky, weird controllers, so perhaps that's going to be right up their alley. But like the Intellivision, for all sorts of reasons, we could get into long form on another video if you'd like. The 5200 really doesn't have much of a fan base. I don't know if the fan base that exists for it is strong enough to, again, plunk down $150 so that they can play 5200 games on the go. That leaves us with the relatively small list of Atari 2600 games that required keyboard controllers. And yet again, I know I sound like a broken record, but who is it that's going to say, I need to play Atari 2600 concentration right now while my oil's getting changed? My kids, while we're on the airplane going to see Grandma in Toledo, need a fun with numbers session right now. I'm not seeing it. I just don't get it. But then I realized to myself, you know what? Maybe I'm not the audience. I am an OG Atarian. I love Atari. I want Atari to succeed. I want my arcade to succeed. There is no hate here. This is not a hate or Hank video. I'm struggling to understand the why. But then again, maybe the functionality is an afterthought here. Maybe this is meant to just be a trinket that celebrates Atari in a handheld fashion. A cool device that, you can look at and say, well, that was an interesting accomplishment. It made me think fondly of these old games gone by. There is a collector market for miniaturized everything with retro gaming. I mean, people go and they collect, there's probably dozens at this point of other My Arcade, like tiny micro implementations of games, and there are people that passionately collect that. Maybe that's the audience for this thing, not people who actually want to play the games. And if that's the case, well, all right, fair play. I guess that this is really more of a collector item, almost like a Funko Pop type representation of the Atari and Intellivision history. But as someone who actually looks at that and is almost teased and thinking, oh, what can I actually do with it? What can I play? How can I play and enjoy the experience? I've just got my reservations and thinking I'm going to be set up for a subpar experience. Now, I realize as much as I like to support Atari, I've also been very critical of Atari when I've seen fit, and so I know I'm not on their Christmas card list, nor am I on the My Arcade Christmas card list for kind of teasing the Tetris Slurpee device. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about this device? Is this something that you would want to buy? Would you pay $150 for one of these? What games would you think that you'd want to play on this? How does this add to your enjoyment of the Atari experience? Does it give you something that you don't already have with existing things that Atari's put out, like the 2600 Plus, the 7800 Plus, any number of other really nicely well-engineered products that Atari has come out with in the past few years? How does that add to that experience for you? I'm really curious to know and start the conversation. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time on It's All Duggan Games. Sit, Duck Dragon, sit. Good Duck Dragon.